The nitrogen cycle. So in this video, I will be talking about the background information on the nitrogen cycle. I will be explaining the process of the nitrogen cycle plus the role sun and lightning has on it. I will also be explaining the nitrous water cycle as well as the impacts of human interference on nitrogen. So some background information on the nitrogen cycle would be that nitrogen is actually a limiting resource in nature. It is present in nature in the form of gas, N2 gas, and is essential to all living organisms. It can actually be transformed into different forms for different organisms as well. It is also a great fertilizer and is often used to provide nutrients to the soil. So over here is actually the nitrogen cycle. It's like a diagram that explains the cycle and all the steps it takes. In the cycle, the sun and lightning actually play a very important role in the process of the cycle. Nitrogen joins the biosphere through bacteria and single-celled prokaryotes, which use nitrogen fixation to transform atmospheric nitrogen into biological forms that can be used. Some nitrogen-fixing bacteria live in soil or water, while others exist in beneficial symbionts inside plants. First, the nitrogen enters the soil from the atmosphere, then, through the nitrogen fixation from lightning, it is able to enter the soil. Once in the soil, it fixes the bacteria and then nitrifies into various forms, from NH3 to NO3. At the stage of NO3, the bacteria assimilates from the soil to the growth of vegetation at surface level. The NO3 also goes through a process of denitrification due to the bacteria and goes back into the air. This is when the cycle starts up again and repeats. The lightning is what powers the nitrogen fixation and the nitrogen cycle. It kickstarts the process that follows. As for the sun, it provides its light energy to almost all living organisms in the cycle. Without the sun providing energy, there would be no living organisms able to be a part of the cycle. Things like marine life, plants, and etc. are all things that are need the sun to be a part of the cycle. Now we'll be talking about the water cycle. So over here is actually a diagram of the water cycle and all the steps it takes. So the water cycle for nitrogen starts from fertilizer runoff entering streams, rivers, and lakes. This then lets the nitrogen enter marine food webs since the algae that is produced due to the fertilizer runoff will be consumed by the marine life found there. Some of the nitrogen from the original fertilizer runoff will be nitrified into different forms like NO3 and NO2, while some of the nitrogen will be denitrified by the bacteria in the body of water it is found in, and turned into its gaseous form of N2. This gas will be released back into the atmosphere through evaporation and brought back into the water and soil through precipitation. The N2 gas in the atmosphere also travels to the soil and starts the activity of nitrogen fixation through bacteria found in the soil. The bacteria as well as the fungi causes the N2 gas to amonify into an NH4. The NH4 then develops into NO2 due to the bacteria causing nitrification. The step of nitrification happens twice, and then the NH4 actually turns into NO3 due to the bacteria once again. Eventually, the denitrification through bacteria occurs, and the nitrogen re-enters the atmosphere. To rewind back a couple of steps, as you can see on the left on the bottom, there's actually another smaller cycle contained into this. When nitrogen fixation occurs through bacteria, some of the nitrogen can actually branch off into terrestrial food webs and then move over to nitrogenous waste in soils. These two steps will lead it back to the step of ammonification of bacteria. So now I'll be talking about the impacts of human interference. Nitrogen is a limiting resource, which is why most fertilizers contain it. Humans are able to make nitrogen mechanically through a process called the Haber-Bosch process. This is used in fertilizers. The use of fertilizers containing nitrogen and phosphorus causes the sprouting of algae in areas that the fertilizer spreads to due to the runoff. For example, lakes and rivers will experience this process, which is named eutrophication, which is basically the process of runoff from fertilizers into nearby streams, rivers, lakes, bodies of water, basically. This impacts the oxygen levels of the area that is most impacted by the runoff, and it is known to cause death in organisms living in those ecosystems. The algae that grows due to the fertilizer necessitates a surplus amount of oxygen during nightfall, which causes other organisms sharing this space with them to die due to the obscenely low oxygen rates. Human activity has caused a significant amount of nitrogen to be released into the atmosphere. The two main contributors to the release of nitrogen are the use and production of fertilizers, as I was talking about before, the runoff of fertilizers into water, as well as like the production of fertilizers, because humans are able to make fertilizers through mechanical ways. And then as well as the combustion of fossil fuels. The troubles resulting from nitrogen release caused by human activities are the increase of greenhouse effect, because the more combustion of fossil fuels and the more nitrogen that is released into the air will obviously raise the greenhouse effect. And it also causes the production of acid rain. As explained in the water cycle before, the nitrogen that goes into the water can actually come back and cause acid rain.